In 1966, every major American television network decided simultaneously that science fiction was the future of television. They were right about the genre and catastrophically wrong about which specific shows would survive long enough to matter. Within a single calendar year, audiences received Star Trek, Batman, Dark Shadows, The Time Tunnel, The Green Hornet, and half a dozen others, all launching within months of each other on competing networks. Two superhero shows premiered on different networks on the exact same night with nearly identical premises, and neither network knew the other one was doing it. One country produced its own science fiction series 9 days after Star Trek debuted, with zero knowledge that Star Trek even existed. Most of these shows were canceled within a year. So what actually happened to all of them? Irwin Allen spent $1 million building a single set, and that was in 1966 dollars. The Time Tunnel's central prop, that swirling concentric vortex through which scientists Tony Newman and Doug Phillips leap helplessly through history, stood as one of the most expensive single-set constructions in American television up to that point. Allen, the man Hollywood would later call the master of disaster for producing The Poseidon Adventure and The Towering Inferno, was already throwing money at the screen years before disaster films became his calling card. The show ran on ABC from September 1966 through April 1967, producing 30 episodes across that single season. Two government scientists, trapped in time after a congressional funding review, forces an early test of Project Tick-Tock, bounce from the Titanic to the American Civil War to ancient Troy, and back again with no way home. You'd think 30 episodes would be enough to at least give them an ending, but the series collapsed mid-story, leaving Newman and Phillips frozen mid-jump for the rest of television history. Allen recycled everything he could after cancellation, with the enormous tunnel set reportedly reappearing in other Fox productions. The per-episode budget sat somewhere around $130,000, which represented considerable investment for episodic television in 1966, and none of it protected the show from ABC's programming decisions. A revival pilot surfaced in 2002 and failed to proceed to series. Some things stay canceled. This is the single most extraordinary coincidence in science fiction television history, and almost nobody outside Germany knows it happened. On September 8, 1966, Star Trek premiered on NBC, introducing Gene Roddenberry's Federation, James Kirk, and the 5-year mission to audiences across America. 9 days later, on September 17th, a completely separate team of West German writers and producers aired the first episode of Raumpatrouille, their own science fiction series set aboard a fast light cruiser called the Orion, commanded by a rebellious captain who clashes constantly with military authority while exploring space in the year 3000. They had absolutely no idea Star Trek existed. The parallel development feels almost unsettling in retrospect. Raumpatrouille, known in full as Raumpatrouille, Die fantastischen Abenteuer des Raumschiffes Orion, ran 7 black and white episodes on ARD, West Germany's public broadcaster, and reportedly drew over 50% of West German television households, making it one of the most watched programs in the country that year. Dietmar Schönherr played Commander Cliff Alistair McLean, and Eva Flug played Lieutenant Tamara Jagiellowsk, with a production design that leaned on repurposed domestic objects, including chairs sourced from the 1964 World's Fair and kitchen appliances dressed up as instrument panels, which gave the whole thing a handmade quality that German audiences have apparently never stopped loving. The series has since been remastered and released on Blu-ray in Germany, while the English-speaking world remains almost entirely unaware it exists. The German Star Trek, born 9 days after Star Trek, developed on the other side of the Atlantic with no contact between the two productions whatsoever. William Dozier produced Batman in 1966, and it was a genuine cultural phenomenon, so ABC handed him The Green Hornet on the same network in the same year. You'd think that combination was bulletproof. The Green Hornet premiered September 9, 1966, ran 26 episodes, and disappeared by July 1967. Today, almost nobody remembers the show itself, but everybody remembers Kato. Bruce Lee's portrayal of Kato, the Green Hornet's martial arts-trained aide, introduced American television to something it had genuinely never seen, and his sequences moved so fast that the camera crew reportedly struggled to capture them properly. He was asked to slow down deliberately so viewers could follow his movements, which in hindsight feels like asking a sports car to idle through a school zone. Lee reportedly earned around $400 per episode. The show established him as a major star in Hong Kong and parts of Asia, and American audiences were considerably slower to catch on. The Black Beauty deserves its own accounting. Built by Dean Jeffries, the Hollywood modifier who also created the Monkey Mobile and the original Batcycle, the Black Beauty started life as a 1966 Chrysler Imperial Crown, already an imposing machine in factory form with its long wheelbase formal body and a 440 cubic inch V8 under the hood. Jeffries fitted the 1966 Chrysler Imperial Crown with green-tinted headlights, a front-mounted scanner array, and a suite of weapon systems that existed primarily as props, but the combination gave the car a predatory, low-slung menace that suited the show's darker tone compared to the campy theatrics of Batman. The Green Hornet crossed over with Batman in 2 episodes during March 1967, and the ratings bump wasn't enough to matter. The Black Beauty and Bruce Lee are the pieces of the Green Hornet that history chose to preserve. Everything else dissolved quietly. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was a legitimate hit, a culturally significant Sci-Fi property with a real audience. So NBC commissioned a spin-off starring Stephanie Powers as Agent April Dancer, alongside Noel Harrison as her British partner Mark Slate. Desembarchnalmar Sargsway then scheduled it on Tuesday nights directly against CBS's strongest lineup. The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. premiered September 13, 1966, and 29 episodes later it was finished. The gadgets were present, the plots involved mad scientists and death rays and schemes for global domination, and MGM Television produced it with the same studio resources behind the original series. What the show lacked was the tonal balance that made its parent work, because The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. leaned hard into camp at precisely the moment the Sci-Fi genre was beginning to take itself slightly more seriously. The timing was off by about 6 months in either direction, which in television scheduling terms is the same as being off by a decade. Stephanie Powers brought genuine energy to the role, and I'd argue the scripts failed her far more consistently than she failed them. CBS's Tuesday schedule was unforgiving. The show didn't collapse loudly or controversially, and it simply stopped appearing one spring evening without much ceremony. The potential was real. The execution never quite caught up to it. Sherwood Schwartz built Gilligan's Island around a core concept: a group of people stranded in an alien environment struggling to survive, with no reliable way home. Then he built It's About Time around the same concept, substituted the tropical island for the Stone Age, and sent it to CBS in the autumn of 1966. Recycling a premise isn't automatically a creative failure, but CBS audiences in 1966 apparently did the math. It's About Time premiered September 11, 1966, with Frank Aletter and Jack Mulaney as 2 astronauts who break the time barrier and crash land in prehistoric times, where they befriend cave dwellers played by Imogene Coca and Joe E. Ross. The science fiction premise was just sufficient to qualify the show for this list, while the execution landed squarely in Schwartz's established domestic comedy territory, with animal skins standing in for tropical shirts. The detail that genuinely fascinates me is the mid-season reversal. CBS ordered the premise flipped entirely. The cave family transported to modern-day New York, converting a show about astronauts stranded in prehistory into a show about cave people stranded in Manhattan. Different fish, same water, identical ratings problem. 26 episodes were produced. Virtually no home video release exists in any widely available form, and the show has left almost no trace in popular memory. Schwartz recovered with The Brady Bunch in 1969, and It's About Time became the creative detour that nobody put on his resume. 2 shows, 1 night, and 0 communication between the networks responsible for either of them. On January 9, 1967, NBC premiered Captain Nice, created by Buck Henry, co-creator of Get Smart, built around a mild-mannered police chemist who accidentally creates a super serum and becomes an unwilling superhero. William Daniels, years before he became Mr. Feeney on Boy Meets World, or the voice of Kit on Knight Rider, carried the lead role across 15 episodes before the show was canceled in spring 1967. On that exact same night, CBS premiered Mr. Terrific, created by David Ketchum and Bruce Bilson, built around a mild-mannered gas station attendant who gains temporary superpowers from a government-issued pill that lasts precisely 1 hour. Stephen Strimple starred. 17 episodes were produced, and the show was canceled within weeks of Captain Nice meeting the same fate. Both productions were chasing the Batman audience from 1966, which is understandable given how enormous that audience appeared at the time. Both landed on superhero comedies anchored by ordinary men who had powers thrust upon them against their better judgment, which represents either a compelling creative convergence or a case of 2 networks reading the same demographic research and drawing the same conclusions. The Batman bubble deflated faster than either network anticipated, and both shows went down with it. Mr. Terrific has essentially no official streaming or home video presence in most territories today, which may make it the most completely vanished show on this entire list. Almost nobody remembers the first year of Dark Shadows, and that's partly because the first year of Dark Shadows nearly ended the show permanently. Dan Curtis's gothic daytime serial opened on ABC on June 27, 1966, and spent its early months as a show about a young woman arriving at a mysterious Maine estate, encountering atmospheric dread, ambiguous supernatural occurrences, family secrets, and a general sense of psychological unease. No vampires, no Barnabas Collins, just gothic atmosphere and steadily declining ratings that reportedly brought the show close to cancellation before a single year had passed. The decision to introduce a vampire character changed everything. Jonathan Frid's Barnabas Collins appeared for the first time in episode 210 during April 1967, and what had been a struggling daytime serial ran until 1971 and produced 1,225 total episodes across its full run. The 1966 version of Dark Shadows, the pre-vampire phase, is the genuinely forgotten edition, and in some ways it operated with a stranger, more unsettled energy than what came after, more interested in psychological ambiguity than monster mythology. Tim Burton returned to the property in 2012 with a film starring Johnny Depp, carrying a production budget of approximately $150 million and generating roughly $245.5 million worldwide in nominal 2012 figures, according to Box Office Mojo. The original 1966 episodes remain available on Tubi. What this list is actually about is the version that nearly disappeared before the vampire arrived to save it. The Seaview stands as one of the great underappreciated vehicle designs in television history, a large-scale submarine miniature constructed by L.B. Abbott's special effects unit at 20th Century Fox, appearing across all 4 seasons of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea from 1964 through 1968. The show originated from Irwin Allen's own 1961 feature film, with Richard Basehart as Admiral Nelson and David Hedison as Captain Crane navigating Cold War-adjacent naval drama through the early seasons. The 1966 season, Season 3, is where the show transformed into something its original audience barely recognized, and that transformation is what earns it a place here. Season 1 operated as a relatively grounded submarine drama with credible tension and a serious tone. By Season 3, the Seaview was engaging werewolves in underwater combat, confronting living puppets, and doing battle with what the production called lobstermen, which is a sentence that still requires a moment to absorb. Network pressure toward Monster of the Week content drove the shift, aiming to capture younger viewers riding the broader sci-fi wave that 1966 had produced across American television. It worked to a degree in the ratings, and it also permanently changed what the show was, so that by Season 4, the audience that had arrived for Cold War submarine drama had largely moved elsewhere. The Seaview miniature, built with genuine craft and reused relentlessly across Allen's productions for economic reasons, outlasted the show's identity. The 1966 season is the hinge point where Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea went one direction, and whatever legacy it might have earned went another. Ultraman premiered July 17, 1966 on TBS in Japan, created by Eiji Tsuburaya, the special effects architect who built Godzilla's world for Toho Studios. Through years of meticulous practical miniature work, the series followed the Science Patrol defending Japan from kaiju, with one member secretly bonded to a benevolent giant alien, capable of growing to enormous scale to engage monsters in combat across elaborately constructed miniature cityscapes that Tsuburaya's team built and destroyed with the same techniques he had refined since the early 1950s. In America in 1966, the show was essentially invisible. United Artists Television dubbed and syndicated it into some U.S. markets, it aired quietly in certain regions, and it registered almost nothing with mainstream audiences. A kids' show from Japan about a giant silver alien fighting rubber monsters in black and white was easy to dismiss and easier to forget. The franchise that Tsuburaya built from those 39 episodes is still producing new content as of 2025, with the Ultra series generating billions of dollars across merchandise, films, and television over nearly 6 decades, and Tsuburaya Productions operating as an active company with new entries in the franchise releasing regularly. Ultraman was originally planned for 26 episodes, and its explosive popularity in Japan forced an extension to 39 before the first season concluded. The show that barely registered in the country that syndicated it became the longest-running superhero franchise in television history, And that gap between American indifference in 1966 and the scale of what followed remains one of the more striking disconnects in the entire history of genre television. 12 months, one network schedule cycle, and the American television industry launched more science fiction than it had produced across the entire preceding decade. Most of it collapsed. Some of it collapsed twice on the same night. One entry accidentally mirrored another country's production across the Atlantic with 9 days separating their premieres and no communication between them whatsoever. One show survived only because a last-minute decision to introduce a vampire character reversed its cancellation trajectory at the 11th hour. One series barely registered in the country that syndicated it and went on to run for nearly 6 decades as a global franchise. What 1966 actually represented was a collective bet, with every major network looking at Batman's numbers and the man from U.N.C.L.E.'s audience, and concluding that American viewers were ready for science fiction at scale. That conclusion was correct. Being right about a genre and catastrophically wrong about which specific show captures it turns out to be a very expensive combination, and the shows that died took their budgets, their unresolved storylines, and most of their casts into obscurity without proper endings and without the cultural footprint that might have earned them a longer conversation. Star Trek premiered that same year and was itself canceled after 3 seasons, surviving only because of an organized audience campaign that the other shows on this list never had the chance to mount. The forgotten shows of 1966 weren't uniformly bad television. Several of them were genuinely interesting work that arrived at the wrong moment, on the wrong night, against the wrong competition. And that specific kind of cancellation deserves a different accounting than simply failing on merit. The stories worth chasing are exactly these ones. The productions that came close, the decisions that redirected everything, and the forgotten originals sitting just below the surface of the history everyone already knows.